Teddy and Don lived a quiet life among the bees. Every morning, the cousins slipped into their beekeeper suits and moved from hive to hive, talking more to the buzzing insects than to other people. Don worked slowly and carefully, but Teddy always used these moments to talk about life. He admired bees, how they worked non-stop, never asked for anything, and died without complaint. To him, bees were not insects, they were symbols of what humans had become. And Don, though confused most of the time, listened anyway. But behind Teddy's calm explanations was a storm. For weeks he'd been convinced that something wasn't right with the world. People worked themselves sick, never rested, never questioned anything. And one morning, while they were jogging back home after tending the bees, Teddy finally revealed the idea that had been growing quietly in his mind. He believed the high-profile CEO, Michelle, the head of a massive pharmaceutical company, was not human. According to him, she was part of an alien race using humanity the same way humans used bees, as workers until their usefulness ran out. Don laughed at first. Teddy didn't. He said the two of them were chosen. They were going to capture her. And so their strange mission began. Michelle, unaware of the danger coming for her, spent her morning practicing for a big presentation. She jogged, rehearsed her speech, and tried again and again to record herself saying the word diversity, but even that stressed her out. She had no idea that two men in beekeeper jackets were preparing to turn her life into a nightmare. While she was driving to work, Teddy and Don stopped at the local market for supplies. Teddy told Don to avoid all human addictions for the next few days. No alcohol, no junk food, no distractions. Don nodded nervously, trying hard to look brave. That night, Teddy injected Don with a strange hormone mix he'd created himself. "It'll sharpen your focus," he said. Don didn't understand, but he trusted Teddy more than anyone. The next evening, the cousins dressed up in mismatched suits and waited outside Michelle's house. As soon as she stepped out of her car, the chaos began. Michelle reacted fast, faster than either of them expected. She landed a clean punch on Don, sending him to the ground. When Teddy came at her with pepper spray, she dodged and kicked him away. She sprinted toward the door, but Teddy tackled her into the bushes. She ran again, but by then he'd already injected her with something that made her body collapse. The two hauled her into their car and drove away with all her belongings. Her hair was cut off in the back seat before she even woke up. When Michelle regained consciousness, she found herself strapped to a bed in a cold basement. Teddy and Don smeared some antihistamine-like cream all over her skin. Don asked why, in total confusion. Teddy explained calmly, her alien nervous system would react to the human medicine and reveal her true form. He promised Don this wasn't torture, they were the victims. Later, wearing their suits again, they stood in front of her as she blinked awake. Teddy introduced himself as the leader of the human resistance. He spoke to her politely, almost gently, claiming she was an elite Andromedan officer sent to oversee the enslavement of humanity. Michelle tried to reason with him. She said she was just a businesswoman, not some alien invader. Teddy smiled like he was listening to a child telling a silly lie. He showed her an old tape recorder. He wanted her to speak into it using alien codes that would summon the Emperor during the upcoming lunar eclipse. Michelle stared at him in total disbelief. When he leaned in close, he whispered something that chilled her. She was responsible for the deaths of his family, his co-workers, and his entire community. He said she was lucky he wasn't treating her worse. That night, Teddy and Don danced upstairs in celebration. Meanwhile, Michelle quietly cried in the basement. Don watched her through the CCTV and asked Teddy if she might actually be human. Teddy, in a soft but stern voice, told him not to fall for her manipulations. "Corporate evil wears a human face," he said, "but it isn't human." Don nodded with fear in his eyes. But as the lunar eclipse drew nearer, Michelle started to fight back in her own way. She tried to understand Teddy's belief system, searching for any angle that might save her life. She even recorded a forced alien confession, but Teddy wasn't convinced. Nothing she said fit the story he'd built inside his head. When she mentioned having a psychology degree, Teddy snapped. He called her a liar, called her entire field a scam, said humans who questioned the system were dismissed as crazy because of people like her. The more she talked, the more unstable he became. In a sudden burst of rage, Teddy slapped her. Even Don flinched at the sound. 2 days before the eclipse, Teddy brought out a machine he'd built from scrap parts. He strapped Michelle to a chair and blasted her with wave after wave of electric shock. Her screams echoed through the basement. Don begged him to stop. The machine sparked violently. Teddy pushed harder, shouting that this was the only way to reveal the truth. The machine overloaded, Dawn ripped the wires out, and the room fell silent. Michelle hung limp in the chair. Teddy approached her gently, almost lovingly. He murmured an apology for not recognizing her earlier rank. In his mind, he had just discovered that she was not just an alien, she was royalty. The day before the eclipse, he finally allowed her upstairs. But even during dinner, her chair was bolted to the floor. Michelle tried to talk to him as one human to another, asking about his home, about his life. But Teddy didn't want to hear anything real. When she brought up his mother, something inside him cracked. The conversation spiraled into violence. Michelle fought back with everything she had, breaking free long enough to run. At the same moment, Casey, a familiar officer and someone who once babysat Teddy, arrived at the house looking for her. Teddy greeted him with forced calm. Downstairs, Michelle tried to reason with Dawn. She asked him to look at her. Really look at her. But Dawn, confused and scared, clutched a shotgun and avoided her eyes. When Casey grew suspicious, Teddy attacked him, knocking his head into a beehive. The bees swarmed. By the time Teddy got back downstairs, Dawn had taken his own life. Teddy broke Michelle's knee in revenge and left to attempt one last desperate mission, saving his mother. Michelle, limping and in pain, escaped the basement, discovered Teddy's twisted research, and limped toward freedom. Meanwhile, Teddy injected antifreeze into his mother's fluids, believing it would wake her. Instead, she died. And with her death, Teddy finally snapped. He returned home, ready to kill Michelle. She was waiting for him. And this time, she told a story. She described a version of human history in which her alien species arrived millions of years ago, destroyed the dinosaurs, and unintentionally created humanity. She said they had tested medicines on humans, had tried to help, had tried to correct their mistakes. She said his mother had been part of a program, one she believed would save everyone. Teddy refused to believe a word of it. On the night of the lunar eclipse, Michelle drove Teddy to her office. Employees froze in shock as the two walked past. Teddy blocked the door to her office while Michelle typed a code into a calculator. He hid in the closet with explosives strapped to him. Seconds later, the bomb misfired and detonated early. Michelle was knocked unconscious. When she woke in an ambulance, she shoved the paramedics aside and ran. She reached her secret teleportation passage just in time, returning to her mother's ship. There, she stood before her superiors, explaining everything: Earth, humans, and Teddy. After deep consideration, the Andromedan rulers came to a grim decision. Humanity had failed. Across the planet, in a single sweeping moment, every human life blinked out, from babies to elders, from cities to villages. The world went silent, except for the bees. They survived, and their soft humming was the only sound left on Earth.